He mocked her with a smirk. "Draw this, and I will give you $100 million. But when the cleaner's daughter picked up the charcoal, the impossible happened and shocked everyone. "She is the janitor's kid," someone whispered. "What is she doing here?" At the Sterling National Art Academy canvas was royalty, and power was painted in money tones. Among wealthy prodigies and arrogant heirs, one young girl dared to believe a simple stroke could be enough. "I will give you $100 million if you can copy this." The world's most celebrated artist laughed. Cameras flashed while the room echoed with disbelief. No one knew that behind the silence of polished marble floors and gilded frames, a masterpiece was waiting. What began as a cruel public challenge would ignite a brutal reckoning. What started as laughter ended as a legendary downfall. This is the story of how a forgotten stroke rose from the shadows to change art forever. And before I forget, where are you watching from today? Leave a comment below. We love seeing how far these stories reach. Enjoy the story. The red brick walls of the Sterling National Art Academy soared against Boston's gray sky, dividing the gilded frames from the corridors reeking of bleach. Exactly 1 month earlier, this division dictated every breath within the institution. Inside the Grand Gallery, an exclusive afternoon critique was underway. Vanessa Sterling, the Academy's most arrogant heir, stood near a mahogany pedestal holding a crystal glass. With a casual, deliberate flick, she knocked it over. Crimson liquid splattered across the pristine white marble floor. Martha Jenkins, a night shift janitor forced into a double shift, rushed over with her bucket. She dropped to her knees, clutching a cheap rag. She scrubbed the stubborn stain, while Vanessa and her wealthy friends snickered purposely, shuffling their designer shoes inches from Martha's raw hands. A few yards away stood Gregory Vance, the billionaire contemporary painter, and the Academy's undisputed king. He wore a meticulously tailored suit, gesturing theatrically toward a massive canvas covered in chaotic random slashes of neon yellow and pitch black. He preached loudly to a crowd of wealthy patrons about the profound existential depth of his expensive abstract creation. He spoke of human suffering and artistic purity while completely ignoring the actual suffering woman scrubbing the floor right at his leather-clad feet. For Vance and his followers, Martha was not a person. She was merely an inconvenient shadow, a piece of equipment meant to keep their temple of high art spotless. Martha kept her head bowed, swallowing her humiliation in absolute silence, enduring the toxic arrogance of the elite so she could keep her meager paycheck. Hidden behind the slatted wooden door of a narrow broom closet nearby, 11-year-old Claire Jenkins watched the entire agonizing scene unfold. She did not cry or turn away. Instead, she held a tiny discarded nub of willow charcoal she had scavenged from a freshman classroom trash bin earlier that morning. The closet was suffocatingly tight, smelling sharply of ammonia and damp mop strings, yet it served as her only sanctuary. Pressing the back of an old, discarded cleaning supply manifest against the wall, she began to draw. She ignored the wealthy students. She ignored the billionaire painter. She focused entirely on her mother. With forceful, heavy strokes, Claire captured the exact expression in Martha's eyes. She drew the crushing exhaustion, the quiet, unbroken dignity, and the deep, buried resentment that the elite were too blind to notice. Her small, dirty fingers rubbed the charcoal dust directly into the cheap paper, blending the harsh shadows with an intuitive, raw precision she had never been formally taught. Suddenly, heavy footsteps echoed loudly as the crowd shifted toward the central atrium. A booming voice echoed over the public address system, commanding absolute silence. The board of directors was officially announcing the Academy's most prestigious decennial event. Amidst the sudden rush of students, a thick glossy flyer slipped under the gap of the closet door, kicked inadvertently by a passing polished shoe. Claire leaned down and picked it up. Bold, shimmering golden letters, printed on the premium paper, announced the Golden Brush Competition. The grand prize listed at the bottom was a full academic scholarship, an exclusive solo exhibition, and a staggering $100 million in global endowment funds. The astronomical figure seemed to vibrate off the page. Claire looked up from the flyer, staring through the wooden slats at her mother, who was still kneeling on the cold marble. The academy demanded elite pedigree and expensive tools, believing true art belonged only to those who could buy it. Claire's small, soot-stained hand gripped the glossy flyer tightly, her knuckles turning white as she crumpled the golden edges, a silent vow taking root in the darkness. The competition roster was posted on the oak board, placed right in the center of the grand hall. Late that evening, when the academy was empty and only the faint hum of the ventilation system remained, Claire crept silently out of the damp basement. She approached the velvet-lined registration stand, her small chest rising and falling as her heart pounded violently against her ribs. Holding a cheap ballpoint pen she found on the floor, she wrote her name at the very bottom of the prestigious list, right below the sprawling, elegant signatures of Art Dynasty heirs. It was a silent act of rebellion against the invisible boundaries built around her. The following morning, the atmosphere shifted from quiet anticipation to chaotic mockery. A shrill laugh echoed through the atrium, shattering the usual refined murmur of the early arrivals. Vanessa stood proudly before the oak board, pointing a manicured finger at the bottom of the sign-up sheet. Her affluent entourage gathered around, gasping in exaggerated disbelief. Claire Jenkins, Vanessa read aloud, her voice dripping with pure venom. The cleaner's kid actually thinks she is an artist. Before Claire could retreat into the safety of the shadows, Vanessa's mother, Eleanor Sterling, materialized from the administrative office. Eleanor was a formidable woman, draped in expensive silk, her expression hardening as she assessed the situation. She immediately spotted Martha, who was emptying a heavy trash bin nearby, trying to remain invisible. Martha Eleanor snapped her tone sharp enough to cut glass. If your delusional daughter does not remove her name from this prestigious roster within the next 5 minutes, I will personally ensure you are fired today and permanently blacklisted from every institution in this city. Martha froze her shoulders, tensing in absolute terror. But before she could beg for forgiveness, an even more intimidating presence arrived. Gregory Vance strode through the gathered crowd, the sea of wealthy patrons and students parting respectfully to let him pass. He paused briefly near the bulletin board, his cold eyes scanning the paper before landing on the soot-stained girl standing frozen near the pillar. He did not even bother to turn his head toward her, treating her existence as a nuisance. A masterpiece requires impeccable pedigree, Vance stated loudly, his booming voice ensuring every person in the grand hall heard his absolute judgment. Allowing someone of her low breeding to participate in this sacred event is a tragic joke. She is nothing more than a permanent stain on a pure white canvas. The sheer cruelty of his words hung heavily in the air, instantly drawing loud chuckles from the surrounding elite crowd. Every single eye turned aggressively toward Claire, waiting eagerly for her to break to cry, to run away in shame, and to desperately cross her name off the list. The psychological pressure was immense, a suffocating, unbearable weight, explicitly designed to crush her fragile spirit completely. She looked over at her mother, who gave a nearly imperceptible, terrified shake of her head, silently pleading with her daughter to surrender. Yet Claire tightly clenched her small fists at her sides until her fingernails dug painfully deep into her palms. She bit her lip hard enough to taste copper swallowing the bitter sensation of profound humiliation, but she absolutely refused to step toward the pen. She ignored the venomous whispers, the threatening glares from Eleanor, and the overwhelming financial power trying to force her into submission. Instead of fleeing back to the dark closet, she simply turned her back on Vance Eleanor and the sneering Vanessa. With her chin held high and a chillingly calm, focused demeanor, she took a deliberate, measured step forward. The heavy wooden doors leading to the preliminary audition room loomed ahead at the end of the corridor. The disgusted whispers intensified as she walked through the hostile crowd, her firm footsteps echoing loudly against the polished marble floor, marching straight into the unforgiving light of the competition. The cold fluorescent lights shone directly down on the long wooden bench outside the selection room. A stark contrast defined the waiting area as wealthy heirs casually leaned against the walls, flanked by personal assistants carrying massive wooden cases of expensive art supplies. Vanessa stood at the center of attention, proudly displaying a custom set of sable hairbrushes and imported lapis lazuli pigments while loudly bragging about her private tutors. Sitting at the far end of the same bench, Claire remained entirely unnoticed, holding nothing but a single sheet of heavy scrap paper and her scavenged nub of willow charcoal. When the heavy oak doors finally opened, the elite contestants took their turns presenting flashy and technically complex watercolor landscapes that lacked any genuine soul. The panel of preliminary judges nodded politely, making favorable notes based entirely on the expensive materials and the recognizable family names attached to the canvases. After an excruciating wait, a board assistant finally called Claire into the expansive audition space. The three stern judges frowned deeply as the small girl approached the central easel, wearing her faded clothes and carrying absolutely no professional equipment. The head judge adjusted his severe glasses and asked with heavy impatience if she had forgotten her paints at home. Claire shook her head politely, answering softly that she only needed her charcoal. A collective sigh of annoyance rippled through the panel as they prepared to dismiss her immediately. Ignoring their overwhelming skepticism, Claire closed her eyes for a brief second to steady her trembling hands before pressing the black charcoal against the stark white paper. She did not attempt to paint a beautiful landscape or an abstract illusion. Instead, she drew a chillingly realistic portrait of an elderly homeless man she had seen shivering violently inside a damp Boston subway station. Her dirty fingers smudged the dark dust to create deep, agonizing shadows that captured the raw, biting cold of the concrete and the profound despair etched into the man's weathered face. The harsh scraping sound of the charcoal filled the silent room, echoing the exact agony of the marginalized figure emerging on the page. Every stroke was a desperate plea for humanity, delivered with an intuitive mastery of light and texture that no amount of money could ever purchase. When Claire finally stepped back, her hands stained entirely black, the previously dismissive judges sat completely frozen in their leather chairs. The profound sorrow radiating from the raw sketch bypassed their elitist prejudices and struck them with undeniable emotional force. They were seasoned art critics who had not felt true artistic devastation in decades. Unable to justify rejecting such a visceral masterpiece, the head judge slowly lowered his pen and reluctantly stamped her paper with the official seal of approval, advancing her to the next round. The moment the preliminary results were pinned to the door outside the corridor erupted into absolute chaos. Vanessa let out a piercing shriek of pure outrage, throwing a furious tantrum as she realized a maid's daughter had advanced alongside her. High above the commotion, standing half hidden in the shadows of the second-floor observation balcony, Gregory Vance watched the entire scene unfold with a dark, menacing glare. He slowly raised a crystal glass of expensive wine to his lips, but his grip tightened so fiercely around the delicate stem that his knuckles turned completely white. The billionaire artist stared down at the small girl holding her piece of charcoal, suddenly realizing that his untouchable monopoly built on lies and wealth was now legitimately threatened by a destitute child armed with nothing but the truth. The autumn fundraising gala transformed the Academy's main hall into a dazzling stage suffocating with expensive perfume and elegant lies. Men in tailored tuxedos and women in custom silk gowns mingled freely, completely unaware that a brutal psychological execution was about to take place. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light over the wealthy patrons, while national television crews actively positioned heavy cameras to broadcast the highly anticipated charity auction. Gregory Vance decided this extravagant event was the perfect opportunity to publicly crush the defiant girl and firmly remind the lower class of their permanent place in society. He instructed his private security detail to locate Claire, who was quietly waiting in the dimly lit service corridor, and drag her directly into the blinding spotlight of the central podium. The sudden physical force left the young girl deeply disoriented as she was thrust before hundreds of elite guests. Taking the microphone with an air of absolute superiority, Vance did not merely introduce her to the influential crowd. He ruthlessly stripped away every ounce of her remaining dignity. He pointed a manicured finger toward the distant maintenance wing, loudly announcing to the live broadcast that her mother Martha was currently scrubbing the Academy's toilets and sanitizing their urinals. A collective gasp of manufactured scandal rippled through the audience, immediately followed by cruel, echoing laughter that bounced off the vaulted ceilings. Vanessa and Eleanor Sterling stood prominently in the front row, openly sneering while sipping vintage champagne. Basking in the toxic approval of his peers, Vance stepped toward his heavily guarded centerpiece artwork. With a theatrical flourish, he yanked down the heavy velvet cloth to reveal a massive canvas covered in violently confusing nonsensical slashes of neon paint. He then looked down at the trembling 11-year-old girl, his face twisting into a deeply condescending smirk. "Draw this, and I will give you $100 million, he mocked loudly, his voice booming through the sophisticated sound system. He forced a thick piece of premium charcoal into her small, sweaty palm. This was never a genuine artistic challenge. It was a highly calculated psychological weapon meticulously designed to completely paralyze her. The sheer scale of his chaotic abstract canvas contrasted brutally with the fragile piece of charred wood she held. The oppressive weight of the billionaire's absolute institutional power pressed down heavily on her small, developing shoulders. Brilliant camera flashes erupted continuously, blinding her vision and mimicking a terrifying criminal interrogation. The condescending whispers of the wealthy patrons quickly morphed into a deafening, suffocating roar inside her head. Her chest heaved as a severe panic attack took hold, making the grand hall spin wildly around her. Claire stared blankly at the absurd painting, desperately trying to find any emotional truth in the scattered colors, but there was absolutely nothing there except arrogant emptiness. She looked at the sea of hostile faces mocking her poverty, suddenly realizing that this entire elite system was fundamentally rigged to humiliate her and protect their inherited privilege. Her fragile heart simply shattered under the immense calculated cruelty of the adult world. Panic tightened her throat until she could no longer breathe the perfumed air. Instead of raising her hand to copy the billionaire's soulless creation, she forcefully threw the piece of charcoal directly onto the pristine marble floor. It shattered instantly into a dozen sharp black fragments, leaving a dark smudge on the spotless stone. Before the security guards or the shocked camera operators could react, The young girl spun around, pushed desperately through the heavy brass exit doors, and bolted blindly into the freezing rain-soaked night. Standing comfortably under the warm, brilliant stage lights, surrounded by his adoring elite followers, Gregory Vance watched her small silhouette disappear into the harsh darkness and let out a low, deeply triumphant laugh. He turned back to the flashing cameras, absolutely certain that he had permanently destroyed her fragile spirit. The cramped basement apartment sank into the rhythmic patter of cold rain leaking through a cracked window pane. Claire was curled into a tight ball on her narrow mattress, her small shoulders violently shaking as she sobbed into a damp pillow. The oppressive weight of the billionaire's calculated cruelty had finally broken her defenses. The door creaked open, and Martha stepped inside, completely soaked from the storm. But tonight there was no gentle coddling or soft lullaby. Martha dropped her wet coat, walked directly to the bed, and firmly pulled the blanket away. She wiped the tear-streaked dirt from her daughter's face with a calloused thumb, her expression hardened by years of silent endurance and sudden fierce resolve. Without saying a comforting word, Martha grabbed Claire by the hand and led her back out into the freezing downpour, marching fiercely toward the academy's forgotten archival storage located deep beneath the main campus. They descended a winding concrete staircase until they reached a heavy steel door. Inside the dusty, climate-controlled vault, an old man sat under a solitary amber desk lamp. Arthur Caldwell, the Academy's reclusive archivist and a decorated military veteran, looked up from his reading glasses. He nodded solemnly at Martha, as if he had been expecting this exact midnight visit. Arthur stood up, his joints popping, and slowly unlocked a highly secured iron safe hidden behind a shelf of cataloged bronze sculptures. He pulled out a worn leather-bound sketchbook, its frayed edges permanently stained with dark rusted patches of old dried blood. He placed the fragile artifact gently on the wooden table, pushing it toward the shivering 11-year-old girl. Arthur's raspy voice broke the heavy silence as he explained that the book belonged to Sergeant Thomas Jenkins Clare's late grandfather. He revealed a staggering hidden truth that the wealthy board of directors had purposefully buried for decades. Thomas was not just a prominent founding member who fought tirelessly for the institution's initial scholarship funds. He was a brilliant frontline battlefield artist. While other painters sat in comfortable sunlit studios, Thomas crouched in muddy trenches, capturing the raw, terrifying reality of human survival amidst raining artillery shells. Arthur opened the pages to reveal breathtaking, harrowing sketches of exhausted soldiers. He told Claire that her grandfather possessed a unique method, born entirely from desperation and limited supplies. The old archivist reached into his pocket, pulling out a thick stick of pure vine charcoal, and handed it to the young girl. He instructed her to press the black wood aggressively onto a piece of rough canvas, then grabbed her small, trembling hand. Arthur taught her Thomas's secret combat technique, demonstrating how to use her bare fingertips to aggressively smudge and grind the loose carbon dust directly into the woven fabric. By layering the raw soot with the natural oils from her skin, she could instantly carve out an impossible, haunting spatial depth that expensive imported brushes could never artificially replicate. It was a gritty, visceral style, forged in fire smoke and pure adrenaline, making it utterly immune to elite mimicry. As Claire practiced the aggressive, sweeping hand motions, the dark charcoal dust coated her palms like battle armor. The profound, paralyzing humiliation she suffered earlier at the glamorous gala slowly evaporated from her mind. Every forceful smear across the canvas purged the lingering fear of Gregory Vance and his wealthy sycophants. Her previous tears dried up completely, replaced by an intense burning clarity. Staring down at her black calloused fingertips, the young girl realized she carried an unbreakable, artistic lineage in her blood. The crushing sadness that had driven her into the night swiftly transformed into a cold, calculated, and relentless fire for vengeance. A fleet of glossy black limousines crawled one after another through the curving iron gates on the night of the grand finale. The prestigious auditorium buzzed with an electric, suffocating energy as the nation's wealthiest patrons, notorious art critics, and influential media figures took their velvet seats. Gregory Vance stood near the front of the stage with his arms crossed tightly over his custom-tailored tuxedo, projecting an aura of absolute invincibility. He offered practiced, condescending smiles to the flashing press cameras, eagerly anticipating the ultimate public humiliation of the lower class. A massive, untouched white canvas loomed at the center of the stage, under blazing theatrical spotlights, waiting for the final performances. When the announcer called her name, the heavy velvet curtains parted, and Claire stepped onto the polished hardwood floor. She wore the same faded clothes from the preliminary rounds, but her posture had entirely transformed into something terrifyingly resolute. She did not tremble or look down at her worn shoes. Her small hands were already stained pitch black from the raw soot of the basement. A cruel murmur of derision rippled through the audience as the elite crowd prepared to witness a spectacular, entertaining failure. She walked directly to the towering blank canvas, completely ignoring the billionaire artist standing just a few feet away. Gregory let out a sharp, mocking scoff, fully expecting her to break down crying or attempt a pathetic imitation of his expensive abstract style to win the $100 million. Instead, Claire took a deep breath, raised her blackened fingertips, and struck the pristine fabric with shocking, explosive force. There was no delicate brushwork or hesitant tracing. She applied the brutal combat technique passed down from her grandfather, aggressively driving the thick vine charcoal into the woven material. The harsh scratching sound of wood grinding against canvas echoed sharply through the silent auditorium, mimicking the raw intensity of a distant battlefield. She used her bare palms to smear the heavy carbon dust, pressing her entire body weight into the strokes to forge impossibly deep, agonizing shadows. Her fingers moved with a frantic yet highly calculated precision, attacking the white space with a relentless cold fury. She blended the harsh lines using the natural oils of her skin, ripping away the superficial beauty that the Academy so fiercely protected. Minute by minute, a staggering image clawed its way out of the darkness. It was not a serene landscape designed to match expensive furniture, nor was it a chaotic splash of meaningless neon colors hiding behind pretentious philosophy. Massive, hyper-realistic layers began to form a pair of heavily scarred, blistered hands gripping the splintered wooden handle of a janitor's mop. The excruciating details emerged with terrifying, undeniable clarity. Claire drew the deep cracked calluses, the swollen arthritic knuckles, and the faint agonizing traces of fresh blood seeping into the rough wood. Every agonizing smudge represented a lifetime of invisible, backbreaking labor carrying the crushing weight of the elite world. The drawing was so viscerally authentic that the metallic smell of blood and the stinging scent of industrial bleach almost seemed to physically manifest in the filtered air. As the final devastating stroke locked the composition into place, the entire auditorium plunged into an absolute suffocating silence. The mocking whispers died instantly in the throats of the wealthy critics. Prominent gallery owners stopped adjusting their glasses, completely paralyzed by the sheer emotional gravity radiating from the stage. The masterpiece did not ask for their elite approval. It violently demanded their inescapable guilt. Standing just a few paces away, Gregory felt the oxygen completely vanish from his lungs. The arrogant smirk melted entirely off his face, replaced by an ashen, sickly pallor. His meticulously constructed facade of superiority shattered into a million irreparable pieces under the crushing weight of absolute truth. The dark, bleeding hands on the canvas seemed to reach out and choke the very foundation of his fraudulent empire. He realized instantly that no amount of wealth could ever replicate the profound soul captured on that canvas. He took a shaky, involuntary step backward, his polished leather shoes slipping slightly on the slick floor. For the first time in his entire manufactured life, the untouchable billionaire artist stood before a destitute child and trembled in absolute paralyzing fear. The next morning, the haunting image of the black charcoal hands gripping a mop covered the front pages of every major newspaper across America. The towering empire of elite deceit collapsed with astonishing speed. Facing unprecedented public backlash, the Academy's board of directors convened an emergency meeting and officially terminated Gregory Vance before noon. Federal agents from the Internal Revenue Service swiftly raided his opulent penthouse, freezing his vast financial assets, following sudden investigations into his extensive use of overpriced abstract paintings to launder illicit funds through offshore shell companies. The previously untouchable billionaire was publicly humiliated, stripped of his prestigious titles, and left facing severe criminal charges that would keep him behind bars for decades. His highly guarded private galleries were forcibly shut down by government officials, while his entire collection of fraudulent artwork was seized as federal evidence. Vanessa and her wealthy peers, who had spent months viciously mocking the impoverished janitor, were forced to lower their heads in deep shame as the undeniable truth of their hollow talent was permanently exposed to the unforgiving world. Acknowledging the undeniable masterpiece, the institution honored the original competition rules and immediately awarded Claire the grand prize of $100 million. She and Martha happily packed their few meager belongings and permanently left the damp, suffocating basement apartment behind. They purchased a beautiful, modest, sunlit house in a quiet suburban neighborhood surrounded by ancient oak trees, finally experiencing the profound peace and security they had always deserved. Martha never had to touch a dirty mop, endure toxic insults, or scrub another marble floor again. Instead, she spent her peaceful days tending to a vibrant rose garden while proudly watching her brave daughter thrive in a world that could no longer ignore her. Several months later, Claire used a significant portion of her vast endowment to convert an abandoned brick warehouse into a free, spacious art studio for underprivileged youth. She stood before a dozen young children from the city's poorest districts, gently placing pieces of raw vine charcoal into their small, eager hands. Looking at their bright, hopeful faces, the young prodigy shared her ultimate revelation, concluding her extraordinary journey. She told them that genuine power does not come from expensive imported tools, inherited wealth, or the arrogant validation of a corrupted elite class. Real strength is found in embracing your own painful reality and having the courage to display it without a single apology. Art is never just a luxury reserved for the rich, Claire said quietly, her voice echoing with profound wisdom far beyond her years. It is the most powerful weapon of truth we possess in this brutal world. It gives a loud, resilient voice to the invisible and grants incredible, unwavering strength to the broken people who carry society on their shoulders. Never let anyone tell you that your struggle does not matter. The world might try to erase you and silence your history, but when you draw with absolute sincerity and fierce honesty, even the most arrogant empires will crumble before your charcoal.